Initiation by Elisabeth Haich. Chapter 9, Struggles of Love. The years passed quickly. As I grew, my body began to mature. I enjoyed reading books that dealt with love stories and problems of love. So I delved deeper and deeper into my personality. I looked forward into the future and determined to find a noble-spirited husband who would understand me perfectly. In this way, I began to concern myself less with books and more with young people, later with young men. The young men were also interested in me. Mother tried in vain to bring me up as a modest young lady. Even after my earliest years, I had to realize that I possessed a power of attraction. However, in my blindness, I considered that this power, which drew so many people towards me, was an attractiveness emanating from my person. We always have to pay attention for our spiritual deficiencies, and because of my being blinded to the truth at this age, I was later to have to pay the price of becoming almost physically blind. I had yet to learn that my power of attraction was not intended to serve my private life, but rather to lead people following me along the path of their salvation. At that time, however, my whole thinking centered around my personality, and I believed I would find my highest happiness in the love of man and wife. I thus went through many of the experiences that are usual in the world. I was loved and I fell in love, but all my joys and sorrows were merely a prelude to my later destiny. A relationship with one man in particular dominated the 6 years of my life from the age of 13 until I was 19, and looking at it in retrospect, I would call this whole experience a training school for the development of unusually strong willpower. My destiny knew that I was going to need this weapon in life. When I was 13, I met a young man whose brilliant traits made him stand out high above the average. His character was made up of a purposeful and determined striving for the highest and finest and most beautiful things in life, combined with an almost pathologically acute egotism and desire for power. He loved me, so he said, but he loved himself and he wanted to make me his obedient slave. He recognized very early that we both had the same spiritual viewpoint and that art meant the same to me as it did to him. This led him to believe that he had found in me a partner worthy of himself. He hoped in time to make me over into his own image, a highly cultured but absolutely obedient wife. He thought he would do away completely with my independent thinking. He bought me, He brought me excellent books about art, the history of art, music, world history, the best works of literature, both modern and classical, and he insisted that I read these works in the original. Since I found learning languages just for their own sake extremely boring, he took the time to learn languages with me. Then he sought out the best piano teacher for me. In short, he did everything imaginable to help me get an unusually good education. Mother saw in him a helpful angel for my education. Because languages were really hard for me, the best tutors tried in vain to teach me. I refused to learn long lists of words by heart. This young man brought me German, French, and English, newspapers, magazines, and theatrical works, then read them with me, thus helping me to work my way into various languages. That was very helpful and certainly all to the good. But along with this helpfulness, he kept trying consistently and purposely to force me under his domination. Shortly after we got acquainted, he said that I was going to become his wife, and he wanted me to consider myself as his property. Everything I wanted to read, I had to show him first to get his permission. He refused to let me make friends with anybody at all without his prior permission. Like other young girls, I went to a dancing school with my sister. I was passionately fond of dancing and equally fond of having a good time with the other young people in the class. I also enjoyed ice skating. None of these things had any appeal for him, But I was young and I wanted to dance and skate and have a good time with other young people. This made him jealous, and to a degree far surpassing anything one might consider normal. Worst of all, his jealousy went hand in hand with an almost insatiable desire for power. At first I was flattered that a man who was so well known and highly esteemed by so many people should have chosen a little girl like me as his future wife. He was a brilliant talker, and quite often I enjoyed conversations with him tremendously. I was also pleased that he took the same profound and serious views of friendship and love that I did. On the other hand, when I began to feel that he was systematically and consistently trying to force his will upon me more and more like a band of steel, all his attentions became annoying. A struggle began, a terrible struggle, between the invisible forces of two souls. The more he felt I was growing out of his power, the more firmly he sought to hold me. When I was 17, he wanted us to announce our engagement publicly. He sent his father to visit mine. My father was not exactly delighted. A long time afterwards, he told me that he'd never been impressed by my fiancé's aggressive approach, but he didn't want to interfere with our free will. He respected everyone's right to make up his own mind, including his own children, and so he gave consent even though reluctantly. I hoped my fiancé's jealousy would die down after our betrothal. As time went on, however, my body continued to develop in form and charm. His jealousy knew no bounds, and he often made terrible scenes. After torturing me for hours, he often went to the opposite extremes, asked me for forgiveness on his knees, cried like a baby, begged for my love, and promised never to torture me again. I found such scenes absolutely unbearable. Never before in my young life had I experienced any such thing. My father possessed tremendous power, a kind of power which he radiated about him automatically and unintentionally. He never tried to force his will upon any others. He liked to leave everybody his freedom and never expected others to follow and obey him blindly. At that time, he was holding a top-level position, and my little girl wish had always been fulfilled for quite a period. He no longer had a manager or a director supervising him. Even so, he was never domineering or tyrannical towards his subordinates. He was like a tower of strength for all those around him, both at home and in his office. Hundreds of subordinates and all our relatives sought his counsel. He was just, generous, and always ready to help. No wonder I'd grown up thinking that all men were like him. At home, I'd never known such things as egotism and unscrupulousness, and my sister and I, my sister and I had both grown up in a healthy atmosphere of true selfless love. I could not have known what sadism and masochism were any more than I could have understood, let alone bear all the quarrels I got involved in with my fiancé. I wanted to be free. Free! For a long time, however, I could not resist his will. An innate propensity towards faithfulness, together with an understanding approach towards the weakness of other people, also kept me for quite a while from taking any action. But my willpower developed with the years, and all of a sudden I began to ask myself why I should go on enduring this torture. One day I told him I wanted to be free. He would not hear of it. We struggled desperately, for his will still held me in a grip of steel. The longer I struggled, the more my willpower developed, and finally it was greater than his. The moment finally came when I had enough courage to tell him I no longer wanted to be his wife. More stormy scenes followed, but their effect was completely lost on me. I was sorry for him, but at the same time I had lost all respect for him because of his behavior, so domineering and tyrannical on the one hand and so extremely cowardly on the other. In those days I did not know that these two characteristics are very closely related, so closely, in fact, as to be complementary aspects of the same disease. On the other hand, I felt him to be sick in his soul, and I wanted to be absolutely free. With a last great effort, I shook off his will. I spoke to my parents. They were not surprised. And one fine afternoon when I was 19, I set out on a journey with my cousin to his mother, my father's sister, beautiful Aunt Raffaella. I broke my engagement.